Hello imaginative people and welcome to Brainstorium. I'm Anna Tizard, award-winning dream punk and deeply weird fantasy author. And yes, that's me and my fiction that's deeply weird. Consider me your inspiration mystic, here to bend your storyteller's imagination into new shapes using the surrealist word game of Exquisite Corpse. This is episode 16, and it may be the most bonkers we've had so far. Back in episode 14, I invited you, my imaginative, creative listeners, to consider writing a short story with a Halloween theme based on any Exquisite Corpse game result from the show. I now have 3 short stories to share with you today from Margaret Homersham, Erin McConnell, and Joseph Clark. Now, before we go any further, please note that if you are looking for a really scary story, you've come to the wrong place. These have turned out to be gentle Halloween stories on the whole. Gentle Halloween is a thing. I had to look it up. I promise you it's a thing. And these stories mostly fall into that category with a touch of spookiness and a little bit of menace, but mainly they're unique, highly imaginative stories. 2 of them are at least partly humorous, so you'll probably hear me chuckling later on. And frankly, that's what we need in our lives, isn't it? I was thinking about what order I should read them in, and I decided to start with the slightly more conventional story, then go for something completely bonkers, and finally dive into something substantially more bonkers than that. So brace yourselves, people, it's gonna get weird. And if you think it can't get any weirder after that, well, I'll have some more Exquisite Corpse gameplay to share at the end of the show, so you'd be wrong. It is time for Halloween. Gentle, a little bit spooky, and a lot bonkers. Right, I'm going to dive straight into the stories. I'll say a little bit more about each author after their story, and there'll also be details in the show notes. First up, we have The Deceased Griffin by Margaret Homersham. This was inspired by the Exquisite Corpse. The Deceased Griffin dug deep into the sackcloth pockets of the great vicar. Are you sitting comfortably? The vicar sighed as he latched the cottage garden gate closed. The old couple had been delighted to have a visit from their new vicar and generously plied him with tea and cakes. But he couldn't help but notice the formality of the atmosphere. They waited on him as if he were lord of the manor, being gratefully received by his lowly serfs. Why couldn't he connect with these people? His predecessor had been on equal terms with his parishioners, sharing a friendly pint in the local pub after the Sunday service. Well, he wasn't a pub person himself, especially at the price of a pint these days. After his unsatisfactory visit to the old couple, his footsteps led him automatically to the woods, one of his favourite walks. They reflected his low mood this late October afternoon, with the damp dripping trees. The leaves gently floated down from the nearly bare skeletal boughs, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He could think clearly in the muted silence of the wood. It was probably his style of sermon that put people off him. He rather enjoyed the rituals and traditions of the Church of England and the high church bells and smells. Gone was the simple hymn sandwich with a short talk in between. Instead, he'd introduced chants and incense and a formality that had impressed but puzzled the rural congregation. His parishioners thought of him as a great man, but this only increased the distance. I suppose I don't really belong in this job, he thought. I don't even connect with God. I don't feel love. It's the ritual and routine that I really connect with. He He felt even more gloomy as he shuffled his way through dead leaves, walking further into the wood. Here the trees huddled together and shifted closer as a sharp breeze began to blow. A finger of light from the sinking sun filtered through the branches and temporarily blinded him. An owl hooted. A cold wind caught between the leaves on the ground and swirled them around. There was something faintly hostile about this part of the wood. The darkness had fallen faster than he'd expected. He quickened his steps, but then saw a movement in the near distance and heard a low groan. He made his way cautiously through the trees to a clearing where the sound was coming from. Amongst the fallen leaves, a large creature lay on its side. What was it? A giant bird? It was struggling to move, but wasn't obviously injured. The vicar's heart raced, and he turned and fled in panic. Somehow he managed to stumble through the trees, pushing against the branches which threatened to hold him back. At last he arrived at the edge of the wood. After staggering home, the vicar poured himself a large whisky and, shaking, sat down to think through what he had seen. Had he unwittingly entered another world to which the creature belonged? What was this thing doing in the woods on a cold October day? What was wrong with it? It didn't look badly injured. Was it lying in wait for him, ready to pounce? The vicar went to bed, comforted by the whisky, but deeply troubled. Shouldn't he have done something? After tossing and turning for a while, he fell asleep. In the morning, the watery sun shone through the early mist, and he felt more positive. Yesterday's incident in the woods seemed unreal, a nightmare. He would go back to the woods in the daylight, when he would have more courage, and see if the creature was still there, or had been pure imagination, a trick of the half-light and atmosphere of the October wood. He would find something recognisable, like an injured fox. He found his way back through the wood, and to his consternation the creature was still lying there, large as life, but hardly moving. When it saw him, it gave a gasping moan. The vicar crept closer. The creature stared back at him, but didn't move. That gave the vicar more confidence to take a closer look. The creature was half bird, with big feathered eagle-like wings and soft beige, furry hindquarters, rather like a big cat. Of course, a griffin, half eagle and half lion. How did it get here? What should he do? He couldn't just walk away from this once powerful, impressive, but now pitiful creature that was in obvious distress. Well, what he did do was rush home and frantically construct a makeshift sledge from a large, strong cardboard box and some rope, and later, under cover of darkness, he managed to shift the griffin onto the sledge and drag it back to his garage. He found some blankets and a hot water bottle and made the griffin as comfortable as he could. He made a mash of bread and warm milk and tried to get the creature to eat. Several days passed with the vicar in the garage with the griffin, talking to it and trying to nurse it back to health. Should he telephone the vet? But he felt he would be exposing himself to ridicule, and who would believe him? His parish duties were neglected, and the next Sunday he rushed through the church service in record time without bothering with the usual chants and incense routine. He hardly knew what he preached. The congregation glanced at each other with raised eyebrows. They would have an early Sunday lunch that day, leaving for home wondering if their exalted vicar was ill. Something was clearly very amiss. The next morning, the vicar went to the garage, only to find that the griffin had died in the night. He sat down next to the still creature, and tears poured down his cheeks as he sobbed uncontrollably like a child. Love for the creature had, unbeknown to him, crept into his once stony heart, and now he was bereft. He spent hours stroking the silent griffin's feathers and crying as he had never cried in all his adult life. Eventually, wan and shaky, he stood up and staggered back to the house. What to do? He was overwhelmed by the new feeling of loss, but also sickened with guilt that he'd helped make this happen, having left the stricken Griffin in the wood and run away before deciding to help. He must make amends. He would keep the Griffin near him and have him buried in the churchyard where he could visit his resting place amongst the other graves. He would give the Griffin the best casket he could buy and give it the finest send-off possible, whatever the cost. He made plans. The undertaker was rather surprised at the vicar's request, but thought, as the vicar was known to be a very important person, he was probably an eccentric and should be humoured, pointing out that anything out of the ordinary would be costly. At the next Sunday service, the vicar announced that to his congregation that there would be a special funeral service on the following Wednesday and that they were all invited. It was a very grand affair. The extra large casket had the very best brass handles. It was placed in a black shiny carriage, pulled by 4 ebony horses with feathery plumes on their heads, accompanied by uniformed attendants. The whole village turned out, but were rather disturbed by it all. The vicar seemed somewhat reduced in his grandness of late. He looked a little shabby and dishevelled, but there was a new softness about him somehow. He seemed more approachable. They imagined that he must have lost a very dear friend indeed. Time went by and the funeral ceased to be the general topic of conversation. The village folk gradually lost their awe of their once great vicar. He was a changed man. He seemed to really empathise and feel for their ills and worries. He showed a real sympathy which they'd never seen before. One day the vicar was in the local pub enjoying a pint with a farmer he had made a friend of after his metamorphosis into a kinder, less great vicar. "You've come to terms with the loss of your friend then?" the farmer asked kindly. "To tell you the truth," the vicar replied, "you may not believe me and think that I have an overactive imagination, but the friend I buried with such pomp and expense was in fact a griffin I found in the woods. There, what do you say to that?" "Why, bless you," said the farmer, "we do see griffins from time to time. We think they find their way through a portal that exists in those ancient woods, and they get stuck in this world. They never last long, you know. It's the different air here. It doesn't agree with them. They can't tolerate it. After about a week or so, their remains just evaporate and vanish into thin air." The vicar spluttered into his beer. All that money spent on burying a body that no longer existed. But no, since his encounter with the griffin, he'd learnt to love, and his life had changed for the better. So he lifted his glass in a salute to his deceased friend the griffin. He was no longer the great vicar, and maybe a good deal poorer, but he was an immensely happier man. That's actually a really sweet story, but quite clever too. I love that twist at the end, that griffins just are known to be some kind of creature that just turns up in their local forest. People have known this for years, but it wasn't all for nothing after all. Now, the author of this story, Margaret Homersham, tells me she has not written a story for years, decades in fact, and it was just something about the show that prompted her to give it a go. And when she picked up a pencil, got a pad of paper and just sat in front of the blank page, she thought, nah, I'm not going to come up with anything. But when she started, she almost couldn't stop and was surprised how much it flowed and kept on flowing. That's amazing that I've helped in some way to inspire someone to write again after all those years, and it's really well put together as a story. and just returning to the exquisite corpse that inspired it, because I always think it's worth just looking at that again after you've read a story. The deceased griffin dug deep into the sackcloth pockets of the great vicar. That sentence makes a whole new sense to us now, doesn't it? And the action, dug deep into the sackcloth pockets, it's clever what Margaret did, because the griffin emptied the vicar's pockets, but passively, by causing him to spend his money. Although, how could he do it any other way, because he's dead? And sackcloth pockets refers to the fact that he's either poor or unwilling to spend money. Well, that's true until the end, when he's changed. Thank you, Margaret, for sharing your story. Next up, we are moving into more bonkers territory as promised, and we have A Tale of an Aggressive Centaur and a Gullible Acrobat by Erin McConnell. This is a story based on the Exquisite Corpse. The aggressive centaur peered through binoculars at the gullible acrobat. He was having a bad day. Again. The birds would not stop chirping in an annoying fashion, and they would not leave him in peace. It was giving him a headache. He looked longingly at his bow and slingshot hanging proudly on the wall of the cabin, and he considered it for just a moment. If he just shot at the loudest one, gave it a bit of a scare, he could get some peace. He gnashed his teeth in frustration. Tonight, the stars were going to be especially clear if the weather vane was having an accurate day, and he wanted a clear head to view them. He snorted to himself as he ran up towards the roof, harbouring dark thoughts about the noisome, troublesome avians. One of these days he would indulge the man part of him and roast a brace of them for his supper. His man stomach rumbled then appreciatively, and he patted it with his huge gnarled hands. "Not today," he growled in a deep voice. "Today we're having horse fodder." The man's stomach subsided into a quiet rumble, and he ignored it. The weather vane was still signalling clear skies, pointing towards the west, and the barometer looked cheerful. This was a good sign. He looked out over the roof of his cabin and surveyed his kingdom. He had built the cabin with the open floor so he could have quiet introspection with the stars, but he found it useful in the day too. Today the forest floor was quiet and still, and then he saw him. That annoying fool, the acrobat, was back. He was dressed in shades of green, lurid, hateful, putrid green, and his head was covered with a ridiculous hat. Shaking his head in amazement, the centaur watched as the acrobat lolloped, rolled, and spun his way across the forest floor. The acrobat leapt, he spiralled, and he threw his body through the air as if he were a joyful dragonfly dancing on the river nearby. "Ridiculous creature," the centaur snorted, throwing his silken hair back as he tossed his head. Then a mischievous thought entered his mind, and he absently tapped his silvered hoof against the floor as he thought. The acrobat was gullible. He was a fool of epic proportions, in fact. And he could have fun with this imbecile. The centaur smiled and nodded thoughtfully, stroking his beard. He turned in haste, his tail swishing in anticipation, and he ran down, his legs a flurry of hooves as he descended. It was a scant moment before he found himself outside, his hand having grasped the slingshot as he ran, knotting it around his mighty fist. Today he would have so much fun. Eyeing the birds malevolently as he passed, he ran through the trees until he saw the acrobat doing his absurd act on the forest floor. The centaur shook his head in amusement, then took aim. Thwack! The projectile flew through the air and landed on the back of the acrobat's head, just as the idiot was upside down, legs akimbo in the most ridiculous pose. It pushed his silly hat forward, and he landed on his nose. "Oof," he sounded as he fell, crumpling like a drunk centipede on the way home from his revelries. The centaur snorted, his horse self coming to the fore, and he ran forward, pocketing his slingshot as he trotted out. "My dear acrobat," he called, arranging his face in a suitably shocked expression. I saw that awful man shooting at you. What a menace! What is the forest coming to, my dear acrobat? Are you quite well?" The acrobat turned, his face red and confused, some mud clinging to his sweaty cheeks. He looked even more ridiculous than normal. The centaur had to work quite hard not to laugh, forcing up his stoic man self, but he could hear his horse self guffawing madly inside him. I think I'm quite well, thank you, Master Cornelius," the acrobat stammered. "I appreciate your helping me. Did you see my assailant? Do you know him?" Cornelius schooled his expression to seriousness, his lips twitching in a frenzy. "I think it was one of those feral dryads, acrobat. They moved so fast, but they were hell-bent on attacking you. To think that this would happen in our forest. I shall protect you. You continue doing whatever it is you're doing, and I shall hunt them, all right?" The foolish, oh so gullible acrobat beamed, his ridiculous face cracking into lines as if he had been left unfolded in the laundry basket. "Oh, I thank you, Master Cornelius. You are so kind. I shall do just that, knowing that you will keep me safe. Thank you." The acrobat reverted to his former position, upside down. The centaur shook his head, both his horse half and his man half in total agreement. The acrobat was a fool. But Cornelius turned his tail, leaving the clearing, and proceeded to gallop frenziedly around and around, shouting to the invisible assailants. "Take that, you useless vermin! There, now you run, dryad cowards!" From time to time he would turn, his face agleam with mischief, and he would fire off another missile in the direction of the acrobat, laughing to himself as the fool squawked and leapt to avoid the danger. Cornelius tired of his game at last, returning to the clearing to collect his thanks. The acrobat was there, hat removed and placed at his side, showing a gleaming bald head with wisps of hair flying about. He looked like a hairy egg, a smiling hairy egg at that. "Oh, Master Cornelius," the hairy egg beamed, "I am so in your debt. I must say I have always thought you to be unfriendly and unkind. How wrong I have been! I shall have to tell those pesky birds to stop disturbing you from now on, because it was I, you know, who set them into a singing tizzy. I must offer my apologies, dear centaur." And with that he bowed low, his body folding up in two, his arms sweeping out to either side. The centaur glared, his horse self and man self both incandescent with rage. This ridiculous acrobat had been making the birds noisy on purpose, to annoy him. In his mind's eye, his man half became dangerous, aggressive even. His horse half joined him. They stood, arms folded, legs stamping, and they hatched a plan. They should murder the gullible, scheming acrobat. They could take him back to the house as his body cooled, and keep him as a captive, twisted marionette, doomed to endlessly play acrobatic origami with his withered limbs. He smiled as he imagined himself folding the silly man up, bending him into shapes, dancing with his acrobat corpse in a daily dance macabre. Oh, the games they could play! He returned to himself, seeing the hapless acrobat, still breathing, still ridiculous. He huffed. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. "You do that, acrobat," he retorted. "I have done you a great favour, and now you can do one in return. Make the birds more respectful of my superiority, my greatness, my epic centaurness, and we shall not mention the matter again. Does that suit?" The acrobat bowed low, obsequiously, his head shining in the sun. "Oh, it does, great centaur. he replied. "I shall make sure of it." The centaur harumphed. He turned majestically and eyed his cabin some distance away. The barometer had said there would be good weather, and he had an appointment with the stars. He would make a dinner fit for a horse. Oh, today was such a good day. Once the centaur was out of earshot, the acrobat murmured to himself, and to the trees if they were listening. "Good luck tomorrow, dear Cornelius. Those birds aren't from round here, and aren't what they seem. Without my dances and weird shapes to confuse them and send them into a chattering daze, they'll turn back into the death vultures they really are. On your own, with nothing but your ego and that silly slingshot, they'll realise soon enough you're easy pickings. Shame you had to make an enemy of your oh-so-gullible neighbour." He pushed his green hat low onto his head and cartwheeled off into the forest. Ooh, a little touch of menace there. It's weird how the story changes in tone like that, but it feels totally natural. There's nothing jarring about the change. It just flows on with the same writing style, from bizarre humour to this scary, menacing, suggestive attitude or atmosphere. It's quite an unusual thing to achieve, putting outlandish humour cheek to cheek with this lingering menace that just seems to emerge from the story itself. Great stuff! Thank you, Erin McConnell, for writing this story and sharing it with us. So, Erin McConnell writes mainly poetry, and their debut book is a collection called Of Swans and Stars. Erin has another poetry book, Love Lost and Found, due to be released next month, but they're now focusing on writing a series of mythology and folklore poetry collections based on British myths and folklore. Erin writes fiction as well, including Middle-earth fan fiction, short stories, and has 2 novels on the go, both about dragons. One is dystopian, the other is steampunk portal fantasy. Wow, a really busy person. Lots to discover. And I've put Erin's Linktree page in the show notes, as this collates all the relevant links in one place for books, websites, social media and the rest. Now, it's time for the third and final story today, which is The Brazen Maggot by Joseph Clark. This is utterly bonkers, okay? Prepare yourself. A humorous story. So I may be chuckling a little bit, time to time, we'll see. Also, I think one that works for children and adults. And of course, we're never quite as imaginative as when we open ourselves up to our childhood imaginations. This is surely where the deepest truths are found. Before I start giving anything away on this topic, I'll stop gabbling and get on with Joseph's story, which was inspired by the Exquisite Corpse, the brazen maggot saved from the stompers, the pompous dietitian. Oh my god, I'm laughing already. Okay. The office is a neat, pristine affair, clinical, white and gleaming, practically antiseptic. As is the dietitian, Samantha, delicately poised in her desk chair. A carefully feng shui placement of her bookshelf catches the eye where, on the lower shelf, sitting between clinical textbooks, sits the novel Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett. Samantha observes with surprise a rotten apple sitting in her office trash bin next to her meticulously organised desktop. 5 minutes till my longest standing client arrives, yet I'm starting to feel shaky. And get the damn cleaner in here to remove this disgusting object from my waste bin, she exclaims. Trying to calm herself, she trains her eyes on her cross-stitch picture of a galloping horse on the wall, a hobby she'd like to find room in her life to enjoy. Samantha dares another glance into the bin and gasps at what she sees. The world turns around, like a spell being cast upon her. Suddenly, at the sight of food, even rotten food, the stompers are back again. You need to face up to reality, Sammy, the voices say, an echo of her mental health team. You will never be completely well and may have relapses of your anorexia nervosa. Suddenly, from the direction of the rotten apple, Sammy hears a tiny but potent voice call out to her. Hey there, what's wrong? You're shaking with fear. Tell me what's up, maybe I can help. Who said that? Who's there? She asks with an overwhelming desire to run from her office. I'm down here in the apple. Oh, yum, it's tasty, nice, burp. Don't worry, I can't hurt you. We maggots are about as antiseptic as it gets, and we love food. Munch, munch. Ew, a horrible, disgusting maggot. How is it possible you're talking to me and I can hear you? Yells Sammy in a hysterical voice. Stomp, stomp comes the ogre in the forests of her mind. The voices echoing once more. Samantha grips the edge of her desk and keeps her eyes on the maggot as it speaks again. It's the spell I've cast on you, burp. You're in need of help. I can help you, and we maggots aren't so disgusting when human medicine uses us to help with wound healing. Munch. You're verging on terrified. What's your name, friend? Taken aback by the boldness of the maggot and the politeness of his inquiry, Samantha tells him her name while nervously rearranging her animal print pencils and pens in her stationery jar. How can you help me? It's the stompers. They bug me to the point of terror. What could you possibly do about them? You're just a horrible bug. Besides that, even my therapist hasn't helped a lot, always pushing for reasons and stomping into my mind, just like the ogre in my unicorn forest. Sammy clamps her mouth shut, unable to believe how much she's confessing to this tiny bug in her bin. A revolting bug at that. Munch, munch, burp. Oh, don't be afraid of me or these stompers. You might learn there is nothing to fear except fear itself soon. Anyway, what are these stompers you mention? Why do they put you into fear so much? Asks the brazen maggot. It's a sobering question, but the bizarre nature of the encounter with this unusual creature is starting to grow on her. My therapist says they're the voices of control and that the roots of them come from my childhood. But how can that be? I've spent so long exploring these concepts with my therapist, but I don't believe any of it. She's always stomping in my mind. Ah, we maggots are in a childhood state till we become flies. Childhood and dreams are usually a doorway into the truth. Tell me, what is your childhood dream? But before she can answer, the maggot leaps out of the bin and lands against the clean white wall just above it. Samantha screams, covering her mouth. What will the receptionist think? But the maggot is busy. In a flurry of green and slithery squirming, he chews around and around in a spiral. Sammy is dazed until she realises the green glow isn't just coming from the creature. There's a hole in the wall as large as her head, revealing a verdant forest glade beyond it. Forgetting her repulsion, Sammy crouches down and stares through. Is this your dream? Asks the maggot. Why, yes, I've thought of writing stories about this place ever since I was a child. I don't believe it. But you must believe it, or it wouldn't be there. I'm just a humble maggot. I can't make other people's dreams. All I do is eat away what shouldn't be there. The waste and dead tissue of this world. The things that need to be set aside and recycled. Like this office, for instance. The maggot sneers at the white clinical interior. Sammy can only stare through the hole as a unicorn trots past. The sky beyond the trees glows with a rainbow. It's unreal. yet it's her world. Go on, why don't you climb through and take a look around? It's time you enjoyed your dreams again. Burp. Sammy laughs in disbelief. I think I'll need a bigger hole than that. Just then, the office phone beeps and the receptionist's voice bursts through. Mr. Brown is here for his 4 o'clock. Sammy jumps. Oh no, what do I do? There's a hole in my office wall. The maggot looks up. You could move that. Yes, good idea. Sammy unhooks her horse cross-stitch picture and places it over the hole. It looks odd, resting against the edge of the bin like that, but it will have to do for now. She pauses. If that's my dream, what about the voices, the stompers? It's time you learned to do a bit of waste management yourself, said the maggot. If they're out there in your world, let them be just echoes on the wind, flutters in the trees. Believe in your dream, munch and poop the rest. Sammy stands up, readying herself to face her client and the real world, for now. Maggot, you're so wise. How can I ever thank you? The maggot answers with a smile on his little face. Yes, you could leave an apple in this bin once in a while for me to eat. Burp. That wall was quite disgusting. Okay, so that was quite funny, wasn't it? It was hilarious. And yes, this is highly appropriate because Joseph Clarke is primarily a humour writer who's into comedy and science fiction. And he's also a passionate mental health advocate. I think that came through as well. If you like zany humour, he's written a joke book called Fizz Bang Wallop's Experiments with Funny Bones, Wit and Humour Through Schizophrenia. Thinking back over these 3 stories, they're so different, but one thing that came into my mind as I was reviewing each of them and doing a little bit of editing here and there was they all have, and all had without need of my editorial actually, the one thing that a story really needs to have to function as a story. Something that is introduced about the main character in the beginning and which the story circles back to in the end with a sense of change. All of these protagonists go through some kind of change. It might not be an internal change or a psychological change. I think that's true of Erin's centaur. He hasn't changed inside, but certainly the circumstances for him have taken a very unexpected turn. And that's really what we need to experience for stories to work. Brilliant. A massive thank you to all of you who contributed. Margaret Homersham, Erin McConnell and Joseph Clarke. And I'm so glad you found inspiration with Exquisite Corpse. You've all helped weird us out in time for Halloween. Now, before I weird things out even more and we move into the games of Exquisite Corpse, I need to let you know that the format of this show is changing a bit from now on. Much as I have loved doing the first part of each show where I talk about inspiration, psychology of writing, surrealism, and especially reading out people's stories, that is such a treat for me. From next time, I have to reduce the show for now and just focus on the Exquisite Corpse gameplay. I just have too much on, and sometimes you have to sit back and think, okay, this isn't really workable with the time and energy that I have. But never say never. I'm not even going to change the series number or anything like that. I'm leaving the door open for future when I might have more time and more energy to commit to the discursive part of the show. I have several works in progress at the moment, several stories that are calling my name, but it's not really the writing slots themselves that have been taken up by the preparation time for the first part of the show. It's more the daydreaming time I've found, the mind space, the time when I'm going for a walk or doing the washing up or cleaning my teeth. That seems to be a really good random time for ideas to pop into my head. I found that my stories are needing more of these mind spaces, which have necessarily been taken over a little bit by the preparation for that first part of the show, because it is another creative process. It is very creative. And of course, there is no preparation for playing Exquisite Corpse at the best of times. I cannot prepare for it other than to make a pot of green tea and gather together words and phrases that listeners like you have kindly sent to me through my play page at annatizard.com. I just gather my socks and dive in. No preparation or pre-daydreaming time involved. So I hope you'll continue to tune in and perhaps even join in with the story brainstorming, as the show must go on. Exquisite Corpse is just so much fun and is such a great exercise for my imagination. I hope for yours as well. And where else am I going to get my story ideas from anyway? I need to do this. I can't just stop. And I will just still do little updates at the beginning of each show. I'm not sure what I'll do in them. I might even tell you what I'm reading. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to be open about it, but overall, just bear in mind that the show will be shorter from now on, just mainly focused on gameplay. Anyway, it is now that time to bring forth the Socks of Destiny. So for anyone who's new to all this, an Exquisite Corpse is made up of this sentence structure: describing word thing, action, describing word thing. And so these are the types of words and phrases you can send me should you choose to join in at annatizard.com/play. But there's more than one way to join in, because you can of course brainstorm story ideas from the results right now with me. But be prepared for the bizarre and the unexpected. Okay, so your first word. Gosh, it feels ages since I've played this. It has been a little while. Right, the first word is from Michael Clayton. Avuncular. Okay, so yes, I had to look this up, and yes, I do jot little notes on these slips of paper when I first put them into the socks. So in case you can't immediately think what this means, it means kind and friendly towards someone younger or less experienced, so sort of maternal or paternal, encouraging, supportive. Right, who or what was avuncular? Ah, this is from me. Sewing machine. So we have an avuncular sewing machine. Of course we do. Right. Why do I do this to myself? Okay, so the action is from, if I can get it out, Athena, has a capital A at the end of Athena, gave their life for and love to. Gosh, that is a very generous or passionate and avuncular sewing machine. Goodness me. Right, what have we got next? This is from The Poet's Goblin, a couldn't read my own handwriting for a second there, but it's from the Poet's Goblin. Ravenous. Right, last words. What have we got here? This is from Fraser Armitage. Melody. Oh wow, we have a ravenous melody on the one hand and an avuncular, kind, encouraging sewing machine on the other, which gives its life for this ravenous melody. Right, well, I'm not going to wait a moment more before pouring my tea, because this is highly necessary. Okay. Let's see if this gets the old creative juices going. Right. I mean, lately I have been trying to explore how you might not necessarily have to make a character from either of the nouns in an exquisite corpse. You know, I'm saying that they can be places and things like that, but this one, I don't think there's any escape, because they're both, well, certainly the sewing machine is thoroughly personified if it's avuncular, and it gave its life for and love to this ravenous melody. That just blows my mind, the ravenous melody. Wow. How can a melody be ravenous? It makes me think of a song that aches with feeling, because art does absorb our emotions when we put emotions into it. So who's to say that a piece of art will not actually contain that feeling in some way? And I mean, I can't think off the top of my head of any pop songs, certainly about hunger, but you could say that if you're in love with someone, that's a kind of almost spiritual hunger. Anything that leaves you feeling wanting, that you want something. A ravenous melody. So putting that together with the idea of a sewing machine, all I can think of is that the song, this melody, is so full of emotion, and it's sort of tearing itself apart because of this emotion that someone's put into it. Maybe someone composed a song and they put everything, all of their emotions into it, and then maybe they died, and so the song itself is haunted with all this emotion that they put into it, as if that is the closest thing to their autobiography or their soul they've put into this song. And maybe that this sewing machine this sewing machine is the only thing that can put it back together again by stitching it together. It's so bizarre. And the idea that a sewing machine might have come alive, whether it's the song that's awoken it or some other kind of magic, but it's decided to give its life and love to this ravenous melody. Gosh, this is really, really peculiar. I feel like I want to draw in more, well, not what I want to draw in, some human characters to kind of build something from this, because without that, it's maybe a little bit too strange. But interesting start. I think I need to move on to something else, but I do, in particular, I like the idea of a ravenous melody. That is one to puzzle over for sure. And who wouldn't want a magic sewing machine, you know? Oh, there's one that's just fallen out of the correct sock, the describing word sock, so that's good. This is from Mariah. Heavy is the first word. Right, let's go for a noun. This is from Anonymous. Snail. A heavy snail. I mean, snails are quite light, surely. If that's what you're going, if you're going for a literal interpretation of the word heavy, I mean, it could be heavy in some other way. Let's see. This is from the Twitter ID Weird Micro that puts up writing prompts on Twitter. Crossed. Crossed. So that could be in an antagonistic way, or it could be literally crossed in the path of it, crossed in front of. Let's see what else we've got going here. This is from, if I can disentangle it, from me again. Okay, forgotten. That's an interesting describing word. Let's just see. Fraser Armitage again. Craft. Oh wow, a forgotten craft. I feel like I have to make something up now to cover that, because if it's a forgotten craft, we won't know about it. It can't be knitting, it can't be woodcraft. It's some other form of craft, some unusual hobby or way of making things, but it has been crossed by a heavy snail. Oh, that's really weird. Okay, so the snail is making me want to go small, think small, on the forest floor where it's damp and full of small, secretive creatures like snails. There's so much going on that's hidden from the human eye. Maybe I've got into the mood for forests because of actually the three stories today, the Halloween stories, they all involved the forest to some extent, didn't they? Which is quite odd. I hadn't noticed that originally, but there we go. So we are returning to the forest floor, and it's all very, full of secretive small creatures, little worms, beetles, snails, like the one in our story, who is somehow affected by a person who is involved in a clandestine craft, a forgotten craft. What could that be? Some kind of magic. I mean, really, I've noticed this mostly the only way to solve or come up with stories for a lot of these exquisite corpses. You have to draw in magic, but hey, magic's great. It's a way to make things work when they wouldn't otherwise. But what is this? It affects the snail. It makes the snail heavy. Oh. Okay, this is going to sound completely out there, but what if this person or some other creature, let's not be speciesist, okay? It's not all about humans, is making armoury for snails. And that's why the snail is heavy. Okay, because there's a snail war going on. Yeah. And that's the forgotten craft. Armoury for snails. Who would have thunk it? Oh, okay. That's weird. But, how did the heavy snail cross the forgotten craft? Maybe it's a pacifist. I don't want this war. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to another Exquisite Corpse. And see if we've got something slightly more sensible. Let's have a sensible one. Positive thinking. So this is from Cat with a double T. Hard-headed. Well, not to do with armory again. Let's move on from the snail armory. This is from, it's a Twitter ID, EdgeORN1, Sun, as in SON. The hard-headed sun. Right, action sock. What did he do? This is from Jen Moo Cat. Gave a ticket to. Well, there's a specific, very concrete action for you. So the hard-headed son had some kind of ticket to give away to someone, and the describing word of that someone is from Mariah. Musical. We have more music today. Let's see. When I think of tickets, I automatically think of like tickets for concerts. So in a way, this could work rather sensibly. This is from, if I can disentangle it, Fraser Armitage. Again, you're coming up a lot today. Scent. As in smell. A musical smell. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. Wow. I'm not quite sure what to do with that. So today we've had a ravenous melody, an armoured snail, and now we have a musical scent. Got our work cut out for us. Let's have a think. I have an image of a young man standing outside a theatre, and he's been stood up. He's got this ticket, this extra ticket in his hand, and he was meant to meet someone there, and she stood him up. And this mist blows on by, this delicious scent, this perfume that brings music into his mind. It's to do with someone he used to know, someone he used to love, and they used to enjoy music together. A ghost. Can ghosts go to concerts or to theatres? Unusual to welcome a ghost into your life and into the theatre if a real person has stood you up, but why not? Theatres and plays, stories are all about illusion and wistful thinking, what might be possible. So he offers the ticket to this vision of someone wafting past, a memory, or is it really, is it really a ghost of someone who he used to love and who passed away? And then they go to the theatre together, but the whole time he's going to be more aware of her, this spirit next to him, more so than he's aware of the play or the music that's going on. What a strange idea, and kind of Halloweeny as well. I quite like that we've come to this conclusion of ghosts, but wistfulness, gentle Halloween. Why not? Okay, I think that's it. I think that's all I've got for you. That's 3 Exquisite Corpses. That's the standard amount, isn't it, for a show? I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I have, especially with those amazing short stories, and that it's given you a little respite from whatever life is throwing at you right now. Even though I'm not going to be reading out any more stories for a while, please do get in touch if you are inspired by any of the Exquisite Corpses that have come up on the show. I'd love to hear from you. I can still read out comments and things like that, so get in touch with me at annatizard.com or on Twitter at annatizard, and let me know if you're working on anything, or if you've got any ideas based on any of the things that have come up in the show. And I hope you'll join me again and send me some words on my play page. It's literally 2 nouns, 2 describing words, and an action, and there are examples at each stage. So there's a full guide as to the types of words that will work in for each different sock of the socks of destiny. So until next time, go forth and be inspired.